Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Better Call Saul Season 6, Episode 10. It is called Nippy. So full spoilers for the episode as always. And we jump straight into the black and white Gene part of the timeline. So things might change, but right now it seems surprising. Yeah. Right now it feels like, we're getting 4 episodes set post Breaking Bad, which is kind of wild, kind of neat. Yeah. This first one kind of deals with the major things that were set up in some of those earlier snippets, building up to this, which is the cab driver who recognized him as Saul and how he deals with that. I think my favorite thing at the start of this episode is just, he's putting up the lost dog posters in the trees or whatever in the street. And you've got this, we're introduced to this sort of older woman who's going around in a little buggy or whatever you call it, little electric wheelchair. And there's just this sort of thing as he's putting up the poster, before he's even said a word, where it just sort of like clicks in my brain and I go, this is a con. This is him being Saul. This is him doing
I would even say being Saul. This is him being Slippin' Jimmy.
Sure, oh sure, yeah, this is, well, I think that's the weird thing about this show. It's kind of recontextualized to who Saul really is, and that really Slippin' Jimmy is who he is, and Saul is almost this persona that kind of was almost made to like, is it like a shell when everything just like fell apart in a way?
Yes, yeah, pretty much.
So it's like, because you don't know why he's doing this yet, obviously at the start of the episode, but you get it. You're like, okay, this is like this little bump in the pavement that this woman can't get over in her chair. He did this. I don't know how, but he did this.
It was very reminiscent of the, like just the feel of it was reminiscent of like the flashbacks of Slippin' Jimmy pulling the scam, the one in the alleyway.
Yeah.
That was the vibe I was getting immediately.
And then of course he like cuts her like brake line or whatever it is when he's down.
I think it just cuts the motor so it won't move, even when he pushes her over the little bump.
Yeah, so she needs help, and this is a woman who, the one thing it's established when she was at the supermarket before now is that she does not like getting help. She's almost downright rude if anyone offers her help. But she has to kind of give in because she's kind of just stranded in the middle of like, I mean, it's not snowing right now, but there's snow everywhere. It's clearly cold. Mm-hmm. She will die if she's left out here for a few hours. She's probably going to die.
I'm sure she could survive a few hours. Come on, Jesus. It's a bit extreme.
I'm being a tad hyperbolic, but you know what?
It's just a little bit.
Right. It's a bit nippy, you might say.
You might indeed.
Yeah. I don't know if that was intentional. I don't know. The Americans used nippy in that context?
I have never heard an American kind of use that, so I don't know. Maybe that was a very British reference to it, and I don't know if it was intentional.
Yeah, so Nippy's the name of the dog that he's saying he's lost, for the record. But in the UK, you'd say it's not freezing, but if it's a bit cold, you'd say it's a bit nippy. That's
just a bit of a chill.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's something that Americans also say, and that's why it's like a double meaning because it's also obviously cold in the episode, or if this is just a complete coincidence that it means that. Or
it's an extra joke for us, transatlantic viewers.
Oh sure, yes. But the ruse here is actually to fight, because this turns out to be the mother of the cab driver, whose name is Jeff. And
who has been recast.
Who has been recast. Not that I remember what he looked like when we last saw him anyway.
Which is fair, yeah. I know a few episodes ago, I think, when we returned from the break, I mentioned, I'd seen, someone had been recast. And someone in the comments was like, because I'd said, I'm not going to, spoil anything. And someone went, you said I'm not going to spoil anything, and then said that, and I'm like, is that a spoiler? That even if I didn't because I didn't actually mention there was the cab driver, but the fact that we'd see the Gene timeline, I don't think would have been a spoiler.
No. I mean, we're all expecting it. It'd have been a bigger shock if we didn't see the Gene timeline again.
And seeing the cab driver in the Gene timeline is not a surprise.
So. Yeah, so he's here to see the cab driver, and it's basically him sort of tying it, because it's like, okay, he's got this loose end, someone recognized him, and this, maybe he'll never mention it to anyone, but maybe it's something that he will go inquiring about, and it could lead back to him. And it's this idea that he's felt extra stressed since that encounter, because, when we see that he turns on the police scanner when he gets in, he still does that, we see it this episode again, we saw it before. He's clearly worried about this, so it's like, okay, I need to do something to kind of like appease this guy just to make sure like he's not going to be a problem. So how does he do it? He does it in a very Jimmy/Saul way. He's going to help him pull off something. Although, yeah, I think the question we might debate here is how much of this is him thirsting to be who he really was. Because, I mean, so much of this show was him trying to give up who Slipping Jimmy was and just be a lawyer. And that was repeatedly something. And time again, it was proven that he couldn't. And he would always go back to it.
Do you know a little thing that makes this maybe more interesting is I happened to see an article talk about when the Gene timeline is actually taking place. And it's to do with all the, the college football, talk in these episodes. This episode, which is actually all referencing
real games. Okay.
So this episode is dated to around October to November 2010. For context, the end of Breaking Bad takes place around September of 2010. So he's only been Gene for a few months at most.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so this is still pretty fresh because it obviously felt like it had maybe been a little bit longer, like the mundanity that we'd been seeing in these sequences over the seasons had really settled in, but kind of turns out maybe he just got bored really, really fast.
Yeah, I always forget in Breaking Bad that it starts in 2008, and I think it's set then when it starts, but the entire 5 seasons only take place over about a year and a half of actual time in the show.
Yeah, it's like 2 years, I think, in total, because there's like a year jump right near the end.
Oh, true.
Because you have the birthday thing.
That's right. But it's not actually, because I think I remember watching Breaking Bad and being surprised it was only 1 year later when we get to that birthday. I was like, wait, it's only been a year since the show started. Oh shit!
Very busy year.
Yeah. Which is referenced in this episode. Saul actually brings up, this teacher came in and a year later he had a stack of cash that would make your eyes pop out, and I'm like, Joe's so funny about him just casually mentioning it like that is one, it doesn't feel like a forced thing because Saul brings up past things like this all the time to like sell his point. But because we're in post Breaking Bad, and because we haven't been in post Breaking Bad, barring these few little snippets here or there, they've had no opportunity to actually directly reference the main plot of Breaking Bad because they couldn't. So it's actually just so, I don't know, just like this little throwaway like reference to it because it's obviously a big deal. It's the very thing that led to him having to go on the run himself. So it's kind of a big deal to
him in a personal context for him.
Yeah,
it's massive.
So. Yeah, so he's like, hey, like you're struggling to make ends meet, you're still paying off your cab, yada yada yada. You want to be in the game, and obviously to us, like we've heard Mike talk about being in the game. We've been talking about being in the game for a couple of seasons now, and this guy's like, what game are we talking about? The game?
Yeah.
So the game. You want to have money and women and cars and shit, and I'll sort of give you an entrance into that, and then we get kind of it's just like a kind of a heist episode in a lot of ways because it's Jimmy befriending the security guards who work at the mall, one of whom is Jerry from Parks and Rec, which is like, it's impossible not to be likable, honestly. He's just a big likable guy. Yep. Which is why it's funny in Parks and Rec when everyone seems to hate him for no reason. But he works at Cinnabon and he takes by the way, I was craving like a cinnamon pastry like after this episode, the way they kept focusing on the baking of it, and then like Jerry slowly eating it. It's like
product placement at its finest.
Yes. No Cinnabons here though to actually get the exact thing, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter.
you will find an alternative.
Yeah. So yeah, he goes up and he uses the guise of, this one guard's the guy who called the hospital or called the ambulance when he had his. And actually, I got thinking about the weird meta. The way this is lined up with the Odenkirk actually having a heart attack, when shooting the show, and the fact that Saul in this part of the timeline has just had an incident like that, and it wasn't a heart attack, I don't think, in the show, but it was something similar where he had to go to hospital. This scare. I think that's kind of just an interesting, weird happenstance. That's so. But it got me thinking about how at the end of the show, like Odenkirk himself is kind of in this like post heart attack part of his life, and how the reflection and looking back now, he's shooting these episodes might have this extra tinge of like.
Yeah, I know a lot of the interviews he's been doing in the last few weeks, kind of pretty much, every week as these episodes come out, there are more interviews. And they've, a lot of them have tended to focus around that, the ones with him.
Yeah. So Yeah, so obviously, like a lot of good stuff in Saul and Breaking Bad, we get that he's doing a plan, we get that he's concocting something, but you're like, okay, so he's befriending the guards. That's pretty easy to understand in some level. Like, if you're going to do something in the mall, you have to deal with the guards in some way.
And you see him, on the very first time he's there timing how long he's away from the camera.
Yeah, he's like, if I come up and give him a treat, like how long does it take him to eat it, right? And like how long does that give someone else to do something? And I wasn't necessarily sure if he was always going to come in and it turns out he does. And I love that the first time he has to bluff and just sort of like say these really non-answers to everything he says about the football games. But obviously the next time he goes in, he's went and research. He's like, okay, that's what he's going to talk about. I'm going to go and study college football so that when I come back, like I can have opinions, I can mention players, I can say whatever. I like those details, and we see him do it again, and he's timing it again.
I like, because we know the other security guard kind of leaves at this time, but we see, over the montage, at first the other security guard's really like not happy about this guy being here, but he becomes part of the gang by the end.
Oh yeah, by the end he's like pretending to do like a touchdown with the Cinnabon box or something. He's like he's being playful with them, and Saul's like, hey, tell Maxine good luck at her spelling bee or whatever the name was or something like that. He's gotten to know them, they've become friends. It's this thing, and obviously he's got a purpose for doing this, but this is actually kind of genius. Now we were talking about how he's got a reason for doing this. He's got this purpose to get Jeff, kind of like make sure he's not going to rat him out, or but just make sure he's a tied up loose end. But much like Breaking Bad, which started off with Walter, I'm doing this for my family because they're not going to have money if I suddenly die, it very much became not about that. It became about him and what he wants and what he's got this need and urge and passion to do.
Yeah, there's the part of this montage where it's like the screen's cut up into small sections, and it's flicking through the various bits, and maybe like my favorite part of the episode. Honestly, this sequence, it was just so well shot. But it's the first time in any of these Gene sequences that we've seen him have any sort of energy at all. He's usually so just down, miserable, hiding.
Yeah, the spring's coming back in his step at points, but it's also very stressful. Like there's a couple of times when he comes out, especially after the actual plan is going on, and obviously there's some problems along the way. But like, there's that moment where there's that one spot where the security cameras aren't hitting, and he sort of rests against the wall because he knows he's between shots, if you will. And he's sort of, it's taken a lot out of him, so he's not done this in a while. There is like an element of stress and like fear to it. But yeah, so he's into a department store and he's like counting steps as he walks around various things, and then we see him go out into a field or something. It's covered in snow, so it's hard to tell exactly what it is, but I assume it's a field. And basically this guy Jeff and Jeff's buddy, whoever's going to be helping him on this plan, have put up tape or string or whatever it is to ribbon to simulate the aisles of this department store. And Saul's whole plan here is that he's going to run around and take just a few things, 3 items from each of these key locations because it's the most valuable items. But it's not enough that they'll even notice they've been robbed until they do inventory in like a week, 2 weeks, whenever the next inventory is. But the security cameras only keep their footage for 72 hours. So as long as no one sees them live, like it'll be gone. Good, yeah. But yeah, by the time anyone sees anything. So it's like, okay, this is a fun plan. And I think what I like about it is that it's clearly like, it's prime Jimmy kind of plan, but it's also suitably small. It's robbing from a department store. It's not this, like some of the schemes we've seen him pull in the last couple of seasons have been these like monolithic, like, convincing one lawyer the other one's on cocaine and discrediting him, or anything they did with Chuck back in like season 3. Like all the schemes he's done have been bigger, but I think it's smart for this to be smaller because it's just him like dipping his toes back in. It's like small fish for him when he's in his prime, but this is him after he's not done it for a long time. He
doesn't want the attention. This is just, it's got to be just enough. So,
and I do love that we have to get to the fake phone call thing where like so this package is delivered. It's clearly incorrect. This is not for the department store, and quite quickly you sort of think, okay, Jeff's inside the box, and the whole idea is he gets out. I actually thought I was going to stay in the box overnight until I get picked up.
I did as well, but the end result was probably a smarter idea.
Yeah, I wonder if it was meant to go back in the box, but maybe he didn't. because, well, he gets knocked loopy, and maybe he had to go and throw up or something, and that's why he went to the bathroom instead and just stayed in the cubicle.
Maybe.
Because they set up the spot on the floor that needs waxed, and and it's a great shot. It's a good slapstick like pratfall where he just slips on the.
It's a proper thud as well.
Yeah, and it's that thing where the visual of like his leg just going up and him falling onto his back, and he stays lying there on the security camera for ages, while Saul's trying to stall.
I don't know if it was, but it felt like a real-time 3+ minutes kind of going through this plan. In that family. Again, I didn't check, but it felt like it was going on for a while.
If anything, it may be longer than it actually was because it's cutting back to Saul for.
Maybe. I think it was like 3 minutes for the actual plan, but then obviously it takes longer because then things go wrong and he has to improvise.
Yeah, it's one of those things, though, it's such a tight window of time that it wouldn't surprise me, because normally things are shorter than real time, because just naturally when you're editing things down, that's maybe one of the rare cases where the editing actually extends how long it is, obviously before things go wrong, because then it just naturally goes longer, but he's sitting stalling, but like the phone call I really liked, because it was like he's still working at Cinnabon and he has to go off and take this call, and he even has to bluff, like when someone asks him a question, he kind of has to say it. It's a delivery problem, which works for both the person asking and the person he's conning on the phone.
Yeah.
But he's very kind of in the game. Like, there's this sort of like, it's like he's him again, It's like he's become Jimmy. And there's just, the great kind of like final beat of the story, as it were, is like him. He goes into the department store after everything's been taken, and there's that great sequence of Jeff walking out and just feeling this elation that he's gotten away with it. Right, that's the feeling that Saul promised him, and that's kind of what he's done. So he has this feeling. Saul wants nothing to do with him again, and makes it clear that he's not interested in doing anything else with him for now.
Yeah, and I know he's threatened them with like, hey, I've just I've played it intentionally with these extra things so you'll get more time. If you try it, it won't just be like petty theft. Yeah,
there was something like crossing state lines, the amount of the goods and value. Like there was all these things that were racking up, like to higher charges in terms of like being prosecuted.
But I do wonder, like, did he just by getting Jeff into the game at all? Was that the mistake? If he just ignored him and hoped that he'd never say anything, would that have been the safer option? Because now he's got a taste for it.
He's got a taste, and even if he doesn't come back to bother Saul, like. If Saul's not there to mastermind whatever he does next, then he might get caught. In fact, he probably will get caught. And if he gets caught, then
he'll need a lawyer.
He'll need a lawyer. I don't know if he'd necessarily think of it in that respect, but he'd have a bargaining chip. He'd have someone to
He would,
mention.
But I do think, because that's how he knows Saul.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
as a lawyer.
He knows the ads. Yeah, that's right. That's why he recognized them.
So I think if he was in legal trouble, I think he'd probably be the first person he turns to.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting. But you have that moment with Saul, though, where he goes back to the department store and he picks up the very flashy shirt and the flashy tie, very Saul Goodman.
Saul. Not Jimmy, Saul.
Yeah. And he sort of holds it up against himself in the mirror. He's very tempted, clearly, but he chooses to put it back and he walks out.
I thought it was notable, though, he didn't put it back properly. It's not on the rack. It's hanging off another shirt.
And the tie's still draped around it as well.
It's like he's put it back for now, but it's the sort of thing where he's not put it back on the rack. He's not committed to leaving it behind. It's like half on.
Yeah, I think this is a wonderful bit of storytelling, and I have seen people online call this episode filler, and I
give every single one of those a slap.
I am baffled by that assertion. It's
if you're watching us now and you think this episode was filler, just give yourself a slap. just do it.
Maybe two if you're feeling spicy. Yeah. This was fantastic, I thought, because the whole point of it is that this is him being tempted back in, because all these snippets we've seen, and even though technically it's not been that long in the context of him living through this, to us it's been 5 years of these little snippets of him being so scared to do anything, and then he decided finally, screw it. I mean, he's got a reason, don't get me wrong, but for whatever the reason may be, he's got a reason here to just be himself again.
He's using it as an excuse, but I 100% believe, even if it has only been a few months, having, knowing, Jimmy as we do now after this show compared to, in Breaking Bad, I absolutely believe it would only take him a few months of living the normal, boring, 9 to 5 day life for him to absolutely just break and be like, no, I need to, his old ways have to come out again. I absolutely believe that.
And that's what this was. The story was. It was this temptation, which he does seemingly choose not to pursue at the end. But obviously, we've got 3 more episodes left, so we'll see what happens.
And like I say, it's not a firm commitment not to pursue it. It's a not right now almost.
He knows he shouldn't, and he puts it back. But I do think it's interesting as well, because one of the things we skipped over is that he gets out his ring, right? Like, before he goes into proper, like, I need to plan this heist mode, he pulls out his ring, and he's got it on with him, when he's talking to the guards, like, when he's pursuing the plan.
He wants to make it clear that this is a reversion to being who he was, not being Gene.
Yeah. So, I think the episode is fascinating. I love the AMC. And at this point, I don't see why they'd have a problem with it, but I do love that they let them just have a full black and white episode, and possibly another 3, because I feel like...
barring the very jarring jolt of blue in the opening credits.
Sure, yeah. Well, of course, yeah, because the opening title sequence starts off like it normally does, but then just goes to the blue, like, no signal screen on a TV. Which,
don't get me wrong, it was effective, but it really stood out in the episode of, of no color.
Yeah, I think they might do something. I'm thinking, like, so I'm still assuming we're going to see Kim, right? Whether he seeks her out or it's a chance encounter or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
I think the moment he sees Kim, it might just turn to color.
Okay.
Maybe that's a
bit cheesy.
I'm pulling it. I don't think it'll feel cheesy in the moment. If they do it right, I think the idea that color comes back into his life the second he sees her again,
maybe,
makes sense to me.
It makes sense, but it feels, even just you saying it like that, it's like, oh, that's so cheesy. I kind of hate it, just on principle.
I hope they do it now, because then you're gonna have to admit that it works and it's great.
I hate you.
Yeah, either a jump or it'll be like a transition to color over like a minute or something. Like where it'll start to seep in.
I prefer that option. I think
I could see it doing that. Yeah, but there's a lot of Jimmy conning in this. When he's talking to the lady and he's joking with her in the kitchen, and Jeff comes in, and obviously Jeff's like shocked to see him there, because he knows who he is, and he's like, why are you? And he's out to pretend he doesn't know him, and he's sitting there all quiet. It's actually a very awkward couple of scenes, because he comes off, like, from his mother's perspective, he's coming off as like very rude and quiet, because he keeps not really responding or saying anything. So this is very much like a one last ride. It's got that kind of feel to it. This Gene part of the show.
Yeah, the idea that this is filler is baffling to me. And there's that really effective moment as well when the plan's going wrong and he has to, bullshit some story,
and some of it
he starts kind of doing a little bit of a breakdown. There's just that moment where he talks about his brother, and you could hear it. You could hear his voice change. Just it's not an act anymore. Just for that minute, or a few seconds where he's saying that part, it's just the reality coming through. I mean, it's the same thing we talked about when we were talking to Howard's wife.
Yeah, it's just the idea that some truth in there is what makes it convincing. And he basically just tries to fake this emotion where he's like feeling depressed and having like a midlife crisis because he's lonely, he doesn't have a wife, and obviously there's truth in that because he did have Kim and she's not there anymore. But I think it's interesting, when he gets to his brother, he chokes up. It says he doesn't have him, and that's like the big emotional point of the show. And then he goes on to talk about not having a wife, and I think at that point it's like it's very much real that he's talking about Kim, that he doesn't have her anymore. And I think that was a very effective and impactful scene. And I think some people just think that because it's because the heist itself is this self-contained thing related to this guy Jeff, that it's not an ongoing thing, so therefore it is filler. And it's baffling to me. Like, I guarantee you, like, whatever happens, like, here and then the next couple of episodes, whatever it may be, like, assuming it's not a chance encounter, right? It may be a chance encounter with Kim, but assuming it's not, let's assume he makes the choice to go see her. Everything in this episode and the next one and probably the penultimate episode is all about one thing. It's about the build to the motivation for why he makes that choice to go see her.
Yeah.
It's all important.
And I think a good chunk of it is in that moment we were just talking about, that conversation where, as much as he's just making up this bullshit on the spot to come out with just to hold his attention, he drew on the truth maybe unknowingly, maybe he didn't plan on doing that, but
no, he
that's
definitely
what came out.
I don't think he definitely did plan on it, because he's improvising because he wasn't expecting to have to stall, and B, the way the performance from Odenkirk when it hits him is wonderful.
Right. And I think that's part of, like, maybe even a realization for himself that maybe he hadn't understood just how much he had missed Kim, for example, in the last few years.
I think that's because, like I said, Saul was this shell, so he was kind of like shielding himself from it for like the last few years.
Yeah, and that's why, even if I still think we might return to some of the earlier timeline stuff, potentially, but even if we don't, I think that's why it was so important to have that scene at the end of the last episode, just to show him as Saul, in his prime, so to speak, to show the decadence, just to show this is what he was doing without Kim. This is why we're not thinking he was spending every day thinking, how's he going to cope. He was filling it with all the money, all the sex, all the stuff that we just saw in that 2 or 3 minute snippet at the end of the episode, and just to remind us of that's how he lived for years.
Yeah, it's actually quite funny is that this jump to the future, honestly, is the only thing that maybe doesn't work that well if you didn't watch Breaking Bad. Up until now, the show has completely worked as a self-contained thing, but arguably this jump, even though I still think this ending would work, because you'd understand, like, because all this is relating back to what he's been in this show. It's not, it's not about that, but the idea that for us, like, one scene of him being Saul to just say this is where we are now is enough. Whereas if you hadn't seen Breaking Bad, maybe you don't get the full impact of like what he's been doing for the last few years.
Which is why I think maybe we talked last time how maybe an episode going through some of that Breaking Bad timeline as following Saul a little bit more. I think maybe that might have been the better. It's hard to say without having seen the next couple of episodes and seeing where it goes. But maybe that would have led to some more new impact on for this stuff. Is kind of having that fresh and seeing it kind of and seeing the sadness of what Saul's life was and Breaking Bad a bit more closely, in context of having seen Better Call Saul.
Would you like to know the title of the next episode?
Go on.
Breaking Bad.
Okay. So there's 2 options for that as to what it means. I think in my mind immediately. One, it's a literal, we're doing what we just discussed there, where this will be the episode showing the timeline during Breaking Bad, those events. Or 2, this will be kind of, Gene Breaking Bad, so to speak, and going, following up from, the ending of this episose.
Yeah, arguably Jeff too. Oh, that's important, but
yeah, who cares about Jeff?
But yes,
to quote Peep Show, Jeff, as in Jeff. Who cares?
Yeah, no. Someone had teased about the title being a big deal for the next one, and now that we've talked about this episode, I thought, let's might as well look at the title. It's not a spoiler. And I was like, oh, it's just Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, I think those are the two options for what it could be for the episode, and arguably, this show has loved to have double meanings in its episode titles. Arguably, it could be both. It might not be dedicated to just one time period for the episode. We might see bits of both.
Yeah. Maybe there'll be flashbacks to like his Saul time that's relevant to what he's going through in the Gene timeline. Yeah,
that's possible. Yeah,
but I was really into this episode because it was very much this bringing out of who he is once again and proving that he is still him and that there's still this desire to be him. I'm not expecting like a super happy ending by any means, but
no.
If I was to
pretty happy in the context of he's probably realizing that he has to be himself.
Oh, sure, yeah, but if I was to propose one, right, and I'm not necessarily expecting this, but let's say he finds Kim, and let's say Kim, as we kind of maybe proposed last episode, maybe, okay, we could find her and she's married, and she's got a life, and she's got kids, and like all that, but perhaps more interesting, she's also a little bit miserable because she's not really being who she wants to be either. Like, you know, what if like at the end of the show, the end of the Gene timeline is like Saul finally giving up being Slipping Jimmy because he just wants to be with Kim, and the idea that they can sort of find each other and give up those parts of themselves and just be happy. Like, I'm not expecting that actually to happen, but it is I think it's a possibility, because ultimately it would make an ending to the show that would show true growth on his part, because he's never been able to give up Jimmy before.
That is a possibility. Although I'm inclined to wonder if maybe there's an acceptance that maybe they just be together and happier and still kind of be kind of bad people and accept that. Do you know what I mean? Like, they'll be Slipping Jimmy, and I don't think we ever got a name for Kim's version, but
Killing Kimmy, I don't know.
That's terrible. It doesn't have to be alliteration. Slipping Jimmy isn't alliteration.
True. Okay, yeah, but I'm trying to think of something that rhymes with Kim.
Yeah, I got nothing. But anyway,
Kim and a whim.
Sure, why not? The point I was kind of getting towards was the idea that, yeah, okay, they're kind of awful people, but at least together they'll be happy and they'll be themselves. Because, you know, that's what this whole Gene thing has been, is Saul or Jimmy repressing who he actually is and trying to live this boring, mundane life, and he can't do it because that's not him.
Arguably,
and maybe Kim's been going through a similar thing.
Yeah, and arguably even to an extent, so is Saul.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Even Saul's not really him in so many ways. Like, in fact, you could argue that he'd convinced himself that it didn't matter because he had all the money. He was, you know, living this life of luxury as this hotshot lawyer. But it's what he says to Jeff in this episode, right? He says, you know, you want to be in the game, that'll solve everything. And he's basically selling him this lie that he was kind of like living himself for a long time, which is, if you have the money and the women and the cars, and if you have this like sense of power and achievement, it doesn't matter anything else. But if ultimately the final lesson he learns in this show is that, yeah, that's if he realizes and accepts that is kind of all a lie and bullshit, and it's not about the flashy shirt and the tie, it's about who he is and possibly who, you know, being with Kim. Like, that would be a very genuine growth ending moment to end on.
It would, and I think that's for me. It might even be more interesting if accepting who he is Slipping Jimmy, and, you know, not again specifically not Saul, but not just Jimmy. Slipping Jimmy specifically is kind of who he is, and I think him accepting that maybe, you know, he can be that, and, you know, maybe, you know, after the time and reflection, Kim can be part of that as well, and maybe, you know, accept that even if it's bad for people around them, they'll be happy. There's a weird tragic happy ending to that.
Yeah, or alternatively, maybe they find a way to like use their weird skill set for something better. I don't know what it would be, but you know, like can they? Maybe they could be PIs or something. I don't know.
That's a whole other show.
Jimmy and Kim, Dicks. That should be show.
Oh, that's terrible.
But yeah, so it's kind of oddly weird that we've gotten to this point now in this last little mini season at the end, and I'm actually feeling like possibly more optimistic for a happy ending than I perhaps ever have before. And I think it's because like they're sort of teasing this idea that he might actually learn something now. And maybe he doesn't. Maybe there's a tragedy element here where he doesn't really ever fully learn or accept it, and that can be a final point as well. But
there'd be a nice element to the happy ending that we had the tragedy, like the whole show was, you know, we're talking about the tragedy of Jimmy being that he had to become Saul. It would be kind of nice to have this little bit at the end where he realizes that he doesn't have to be Saul; he can be himself at the end.
And you know, when I think about Breaking Bad's ending for Walter specifically, where, you know, he came back to save Jesse, but the big thing for me was that he kind of went out in honesty, where, you know, he had that scene, that one of the best scenes of like the show, where he just finally says to Skylar, "I did it for me," and he's just open and honest about it. And then, you know, when he's dying at the end of the show, it kind of does feel like, yeah, he's not mad that he did all this. Like, he touches the the equipment and the tanks and the chemistry set or whatever it is, and he's clearly like got a sense of like pride and nostalgia for what he pulled off, but he almost dies happy because of that. As he's lying there, because I'm dying I discovered who I really am, and I'm kind of like going at peace with that. So there is, even though that obviously had a sort of sad tinge to it, and Jesse went through hell towards the end of that show. I do think like Saul could actually have the happier of the ending of the two shows, but even Breaking Bad to an extent had a layer of happiness, even for Walter with his ending. And I do, and I think Jimmy inherently is actually more likable than Walter. Like in the end, Walter at a certain point did cross over into being a monster, right? There was a transition with him.
He may have. I'd say Walter probably started as the more likable, nicer person than Jimmy kind of arguably ever really was, right? Because Jimmy was always, always happy to pull scams. We know that. But Jimmy or Saul never went as far as Walter. He never crossed such intense lines.
Is it almost like a weird genius to this as well, that intentional or not, Jimmy in Better Call Saul, because we came into it knowing to some extent he's a bit shady, and it never hid that from us from the start, and it taught us like who he was before Saul, and he pulled these cons. There was this like sense of honesty where, yeah, the show was very much about him realizing that he could never not be this, and like Chuck was always trying to convince him of that, and all these realizations. But to an extent, the audience kind of always knew. Like, we always sort of knew who he really was. And that kind of was kind of almost the trick to making the narrative work, is that we know who he is, and the story is him kind of coming to. I mean, obviously, there's obviously twists, and obviously our opinion of Saul has changed significantly because of this show and like where we see him. But
yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from, but I actually want to counter that with one maybe thing that maybe undermines what you've said for me.
Oh, sure, go on.
Because you say, we know who he is, and I don't think we did, because at the start of the show we knew him as Saul. We were like, we know who he is. We know what he's going to become. And we, at the time, we were not under the illusion that really he's Jimmy underneath in Saul's this shell. That's a relatively recent revelation. Still, it was no. He is that person. He is Saul, and this is just seeing how he becomes that. Whereas now, we know he never really was Saul. I don't think in the way that we thought at the start of the show.
I guess what I'm getting at is the idea that Walter is meant to be this upstanding, high school teacher, dad character, right? Who's doing all these things for these noble reasons. But over the course, it's like, no, there's something else in there. There's something that comes out and grows. Whereas with Jimmy, yeah, we had preconceived notions, and obviously we've learned that he's actually more sympathetic than we thought of in the first place. But in a weird way, you can almost argue it's the opposite, where we learned that he had a heart and that he had this humanity in him that we didn't expect, which is arguably more fulfilling. But I guess what I was trying to get at was just this idea that we already kind of looked at him a certain way. We already thought of him as being someone who wasn't a good person, right, to some extent. And even though we do think he has a lot of morals and empathy, and we find him very likable in a lot of ways, the key part of Slipping Jimmy is that he has always conned people, and he always kind of wants to keep doing it. So there's always that negative like trait to him. And I think like the consistency of like knowing that from the start of the show, and the show kind of being him just accepting that that's who he really is an interesting parallel to Walter, which was he was very different and felt unfulfilled, and that's why he broke bad. Whereas in a weird way, Jimmy's always been skating on the line of bad and good. And he kind of, I don't want to say pretended to break bad, or when he became the sleazy lawyer and that persona kind of kicked in, but like it's different to Walter in a lot of ways.
I think it's different in that Saul, from the context that we have now, the sleazy lawyer Saul persona seems to have been a coping mechanism. He definitely lent into it. He definitely played it up and was that person for a few years, whatever it was. But that wasn't a revealing who he really was underneath. Whereas there's the argument that Walter underneath really was Heisenberg, right? He was the monster. It was kind of just bubbling under the surface until it was brought out. Whereas now, we don't look at Saul and go, oh yeah, the course of the show didn't go, oh, this brought out Saul. This brought out that version of him that was underneath the whole time. Instead, it was like, no, that was this false projection that he's thrown up.
I mean, Saul in many ways is just it's like what other people kind of think of him as, and he kind of
played it up and into the character.
It's like people made these assumptions about him that you're not that good a lawyer, you're this scumbag lawyer who does these things. Saul's kind of like him taking that and turning it into a character. And then obviously it then became this thing when, everything went down, and now he recedes into it and, like you said, uses it as a coping mechanism. So, like, there's a lot of stuff very well layered throughout this show. And it's amazing to me that this and Breaking Bad like legitimately complement each other, because there's actually really interesting discussions to have comparing the two protagonists and what their journeys are, and how they differ, how they line up. And then of course
it's extremely refreshing, just in the sense that this isn't just a case of, Saul is just Walt just a few years earlier, right? There is none of that, like, it's the same journey. It's completely different.
But they get to have their cake and eat it too, because Gus is, in a lot of ways. We spoke about that, but and it works in that way because it's this foreshadowing, and actually, because like I was saying the last couple of episodes, it enhances Gus and Walt's interactions, knowing that Gus kind of had not a similar journey in details per se, but a similar kind of journey in an emotional level, where
kindred spirits.
Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, not all this is in this episode per se, but like it's led to all this discussion because it's such a good, strong character piece, this show.
Yeah.
And this episode's no different. Like there's so much of it like seeded throughout the episode. Every time he's pulling part of the con, and you can see him getting into it, like finding his groove again, getting good at it again, and then sort of seeing him get some, if not satisfaction, at least you kind of like he's got this confidence that he didn't have just before. He's got this spring in his step, and that was marvelous to watch.
If you're finding this filler, then I feel like maybe you're not paying attention to these sorts of details. Like you're not. I don't understand what show you've been watching for the last 5 years, almost.
Yeah. I am really come to hate the word filler. Not that some TV shows can't be full of filler, because they can be, but I am really starting to hate it because people are throwing it around. Yeah, people are throwing it around willy-nilly whenever they think something's not exciting enough or doesn't advance what they consider to be the main plot. It gets used, and I really starting to disagree with this use.
Like, I know you don't care for the show, but people were using it about one of the episodes in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. And again, it was because it was a slower episode. It was this specific episode about, okay, this character beat that, happened over the course of the episode. That if you didn't like it, that's fine. If you were bored by it, that's also fine. But that doesn't make it filler if it's an important part of the journey of the story, right?
I would argue the whole show is filler in that case, but that's neither here nor there.
That's an irrelevant discussion. And this is not about the quality of the show. This is not about your opinions on the show. This is about the subset of people that go, this episode is filler because it didn't have X, Y, Z.
It's once I'm cracking a joke there, right? And obviously we disagree about the Obi-Wan
quality of those shows, yes,
whether it should exist or not, or whatever. I do think it's an interesting point to bring up, though, is like, I see that show as filler, and I see a lot of these like shows that come out of some of these big franchises that are getting thrown on Disney Plus as filler. And it's a weird word to use, and I wouldn't actually use it. I'm using it in this context because that's the word we're using and we're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's an interesting comparison to this show in Breaking Bad, in the sense that I guess what I'm saying is that a lot of times prequels inherently do feel like filler. It's like filler with a lot of references for cheap pops. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've praised this show repeatedly for is not feeling like it's just that prequelitis where it wants to constantly reference things just for the cheap nostalgia of it and things like that. And absolutely, this show, not like it exists on its own as a wonderful thing, but it also complements Breaking Bad, and Breaking Bad complements it. Like, if I was recommending these shows, I would always say, yeah, watch all of Breaking Bad, then watch all of Saul, because they do wonderfully like play into each other.
Absolutely. But and I think that like, right up until this kind of end point of the show, we could probably have safely recommended, if you really wanted to, you could
do
watch
either
Better
one
Call Saul. Like,
first.
you know,
Yeah,
you know, but now it does kind of feel like Breaking Bad might be essential watching.
Which I don't think is unfair either. Like, I don't think that's necessarily a fault or a bad thing.
No, I don't either. But I do think it's an interesting decision that they've made fairly late on, right?
Because I would never recommend watching Angel without Buffy.
Oh God, heaven forbid. I would. It's a better show.
You can't just skip straight to Angel. Come on, don't be silly.
A better show.
Don't be silly. I love both. It's not.
I'm saying this just to wind you up. I actually completely agree. You know, with you. I am the one sitting here who has not watched specific Star Trek shows just because, well, we haven't got there yet in the other stuff. So I'm not going to watch Picard. I need full context before I get there.
Oh, of course, yes. Of course you do. I think that's other things. Obviously, we've talked time and time again about this being a prequel and how it's one of the few prequels that I actually think is worth a damn. It's just worth the memory cards that the footage is recorded on. I'm assuming they shoot digitally and not with film, because
I mean, I'd be very surprised if they didn't at this point.
But I think one of this is not a guarantee to success, obviously, but one of the key things that I think is different about this versus these, like we're doing 6 Star Wars shows, we're doing 5 Star Trek shows, we're doing 8 Marvel shows, is that Breaking Bad finished, and then the same people said, let's work on a new thing. And they've not done they did the El Camino movie technically, and like between 2 seasons is a sort of little mini project, but they have focused on this as one. They've not launched 3 other shows while Better Call Saul's been on and tried to have an ongoing universe of multiple things. They had one great show, they finished it, they started another great show, and they're finishing it.
And you mentioned Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, and I think those are fair comparisons.
Pick your example. I mean,
no. I think there's one very specific comparison that is more appropriate. Walking Dead, because I think it's AMC. They must have been pushing for more. They have to, because this makes them money and critical acclaim. They have to have been begging for more. So there has to have been restraint, presumably from Gilligan, to say no, we're doing this. And I'm sure once this is wrapped up, maybe there's more in the works in future that we haven't heard about yet, and behind the scenes. That would not surprise me, and that's okay. Maybe it'll be terrible anyway. Who knows? But it's not unfair for them to be thinking of something else after this in this universe.
But no.
How many Walking Dead shows have there been? At the same time.
I think now we're getting into there's 4 or 5 basically.
Right. Exactly. It's a lot, and that's why I said I think it's a better comparison, because hey, AMC pushed for that, and they were obviously given the green light. Hey, go ahead, make your money, and fine. Those shows are not good, but fine, if that's the angle. But they surely were pushing for more of Breaking Bad as well, especially kind of probably more so even a few years ago when Breaking Bad was just at its end, where it was everywhere. That was the culture at the time.
Yeah. So I don't know if they do want to pursue something else after this, because I know Saul, unlike Breaking Bad, which got better ratings every season, that Saul has it's not tanked, but it has been slightly declining each season.
I suspect the longer gaps between seasons maybe hasn't helped as much with that.
Possibly. I think it's just a case of in terms of a franchise, if you want to call it that, between the 2 shows, it had this natural ascension and peak, and then it's held, pretty strongly since, but it just naturally over time tapers off a little bit. But it's that kind of thing where some people might just be waiting until it's finished because they want to binge it all. A lot of people, I mean, not many people were watching Breaking Bad those first 2 or 3 seasons. A lot of people caught up.
It wasn't until season 4 and 5, both halves of 5 respectively.
Yeah.
I don't think it was till then that it really kind of exploded into what we think of it, by the end of the show.
Yeah, it became part of the zeitgeist. Yeah, because I binged and watched. I think season 4 was airing as I was watching the first 3 seasons, and then I watched season 4 kind of after. I remember I went to see a movie, and there was a trailer or an ad for the season 4 Blu-ray or DVD or whatever. And I remember I hadn't finished season 3 yet, and obviously it was going to be full of, like, you know, I could easily see some spoilers in a season 4 trailer. So, like, I you know, eyes were shut, fingers were in the ears, and I was going la 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 la, la making sure I didn't get anything spoiled, because I was obviously very into it by that point. So.
Yeah, it wasn't like Walking Dead or, you know, Game of Thrones, where they were kind of juggernauts out the gate, and I mean, in the case of Game of Thrones, probably grew stronger and stronger over its lifetime, whereas Walking Dead definitely declined, despite clearly being popular enough for insane amounts of shows. Yeah. And again, not indicative of the quality of Game of Thrones either, but it definitely grew in its viewership. By the end, it was, you know, it was a cultural juggernaut in the same way that final season of Breaking Bad was.
Yeah. So it like, you know, it's fine. Obviously, we're getting very reflective here as we get towards the end of the show, and we don't quite know what the ending beat is yet. But I think the idea of them having this little mini season at the end in the black and white timeline is kind of fascinating.
For the first time, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel and be like, this is maybe where the ending could go, rather than just wild speculation as we've done over every other season.
It's just funny though, for like 2 or 3 seasons we've been saying, final season they're going to do 1 episode in the black and white part. We're thinking they'll do one,
and they spoil us,
and they hit us with like effectively a mini series at the end of like,
and then you get people complaining about it. The audacity of these people.
Oh dear. So that was a great episode. So, you know,
yeah, me too.
People would think what you think. It's up to you, but I think it's in the running for, and this is not a surprise. I was expecting it to be in the running for an all-timer kind of like run to the end, but like it feels that way to me right now. So that is Nippy. We will see you next week for Breaking Bad, as weird as that is to say. So by all means, let us know what you thought of the episode in the comments below. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. If you want to support the show, you can do it a couple of ways. You can hit the super thanks button below the video, or you can go to patreon.com/mailfuzztv and support us on a monthly basis and get some bonuses for your trouble. You can also, of course, get updates from Twitter. We've got a subreddit. We've got a Discord. There's links to things in the description. Go and have a look. But that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?